Hello and welcome to this lesson for Functional Skills Maths at levels 1 and 2 on multiplying decimals by 10, 100 and 1000. The learning outcome is to multiply and divide decimals by 10, 100 or 1000. The linked learning from the previous lesson is that we've already learnt how to multiply decimals with numbers, and using that technique you can see there's actually an easier way of multiplying by tens, hundreds and thousands. In the previous lesson, we would have moved the decimal place and saved it as moving it one place to the right to give us 64 times 10. 64 times 10 is 640, and then we would have moved it back the one place to give us 64. Now, that's a lot of moving around when you're multiplying something by 10. As you can see, there's actually an easier way of multiplying something by 10, and that is the fact that when you move the decimal place one place, you're moving it by a factor of 10. So when you're multiplying by 10, it's effectively the same as moving the decimal place one place to the right. So let's have a look at this number 2.43 and see what happens when we multiply it by 10, 100 and 1000. So if we have 2.43 and we multiply it by 10, then effectively multiplying something by 10 is the same as moving it one place to the left on the place values. So in effect, it's the same as moving the decimal point one place to the right. If we have 2.43 and we multiply it by 100, we're multiplying it by two place values. We're moving it two place values to the left. So that's the same as moving the decimal point two places to the right. So it becomes 243. And then finally, to multiply something by 1000 is the same as moving it three places to the left on the place values. So in effect, what you're doing is you're moving the decimal point three places to the right to multiply it by 1000, put in your decimal point, and any of these hooks that haven't got anything in them, you have to put a holding zero in there. So it becomes 2430. Let's have a look at these three numbers and multiply each of them by 10, 100 and 1000. So if I have 2.4 and I multiply it by 10, in effect I can move the decimal place one place to the right. So I end up with 24. If I multiply it by 100, I have to move it another place to the right, which gives us a holding zero, so it becomes 240. And then finally, if I multiply it by 1000, that's three places to the right, so my decimal point ends up there. I infill each hook with nothing in with zeros, and it becomes 2400. Let's do the same with 13.65. Multiplying it by 10 moves this decimal place one place to the right, so it becomes 36.5. If we multiply it by 100, we move it another place to the right, so it becomes 1365. And finally, to multiply it by 1000, it goes 1, 2, 3 places to the right, remembering to infill any hooks with nothing in with zeros, so it becomes 13650. And finally, 0.37. So multiplying it by 10 moves the decimal point one place to the right, so it becomes 3.7. Multiplying it by 100, then it's 1 2 places to the right, so it becomes 37. And finally, multiplying it by 1,000, it's 1, 2, 3 places to the right, infilling any empty hooks with zeros, so it becomes 370. How did you get on with that? Now let's look at dividing numbers by 10, 100 and 1,000. Now the general rule is the same. If we have a number 745, when we divide it by 10, the effect is we're sliding the numbers to the right with respect to their place values. What does that do to our decimal point when we're looking at our number? Well, if I divide 745 by 10, my decimal point is there at the moment. So dividing by 10 moves the decimal point 1 place to the left. So when you're dividing, the decimal point goes to the left, it becomes 74.5. If we have 745 and we divide by 100, then it's the same as moving our place values 2 places. So the effect on our decimal point, which is after the 5, is 2 places to the left, so it becomes 7.45. And then finally, our 745 divided by 1,000, with our decimal point here for our whole number, is the same effect as moving it 3 places to the left, so it becomes 0.745. Have a go at these 3 numbers and divide each of them by 10, 100 and 1,000. Okay, let's go through the answers. So when we're dividing 27 by 10, the decimal point for 27 lives here. So to divide by 10, it's 1 decimal place to the left, so it becomes 2.7. When we divide by 100, we move it 2 places from its original. So 27 with a decimal point here, 1, 2 places to the left, it becomes 0.27. When we divide by 1,000, then with our decimal point here, we have to move it 3 places to the left. So 1, 2, 3, so my decimal point is there, and I have a hook with nothing in, so we put a 0 in. So it's 0.027. Let's do the same with 156.5. Dividing it by 10 changes it to 15.65. Dividing it by 100 moves the decimal point along 2 places, so it becomes 1.565. And dividing it by 1,000 moves it 3 places to the left. 1, 2, 3. So our decimal point's there, and it becomes 0.1565. Finally, let's look at the number 1,673 and divide it by 10. So dividing by 10, the decimal point's here as a whole number. Move it 1 place to the left, it becomes 167.3. Dividing by 100 moves it 1, 2 places to the left, so it becomes 16.73. And dividing by 1,000, move it 1, 2, 3 places, it becomes 1.673. Did you get all of those correct? Here's an exam question from section A at level 1. So 1.2 times 100. So what we said before was when you're multiplying a number, you're moving the decimal point to the right to make it bigger. So we have multiplying by 10, multiplying by 100. So our decimal point is now there, but we have a hook with nothing in. So we need to put a 0 in. So we end up with 120. Circle the correct answer to complete the question. Here's a question from section A on a level 2 paper. So we have the number 46.8 and we need to divide by 100. So we're going to make it smaller by moving the decimal point to the left. And because it's 100, we move it 2 places to the left. So it makes it 0.468. And that would be your answer for 1 mark. And that completes the learning outcome for multiplying and dividing decimals by 10, 100 and 1000. It links strongly to multiplying whole numbers by 10, 100 and 1000. Pete's top tip for multiplying by 10, 100 and 1000 is that it is an extremely useful thing to do in future topics. So when you deal with money, and especially converting money and metric units, you're going to be constantly multiplying and dividing things by 10, 100 and 1000. Therefore, it's a really good skill to become good at before we do those future topics. So please practice. There's extra work on Moodle if you require it, and you can always ask your teacher for more work on this topic.